Okay. All right. So kind of some potpourri questions, and you can tell us whether or not you can answer these or not. Because these are common questions that people talk about and ask about. Is Aptera thinking about lithium iron phosphate chemistry?
I am. I don't know if Aptera is, but I am.
Okay.
Um, for the past 9 years, I worked with almost exclusively iron phosphate, and it's compelling for a lot of reasons. Cost is one of them. Not so compelling in a number of regards, like the energy density.
Hmm.
It's not as energy dense as the NMC material is. But there's also the challenges associated with the rare earth metals that go away when it's iron phosphate.
Hmm.
Um, there's a lot to be gained from that particular chemistry. And as we as a group of consumers become more and more comfortable with what it means to drive an electric vehicle, we'll start thinking differently about really how much range do we need to squeeze into a vehicle? How
Hmm.
important is it? And I learned the lesson for myself a few years ago. I leased a Volkswagen electric Golf, and
Hmm.
beside being one of the funnest cars I'd driven in a long time, it was um, it was sort of frustrating because it was only like an 80-mile range.
Yeah.
Um, and right now I'm driving a used Tesla, so its battery pack is somewhat diminished, but it still gets over 300 miles per charge. And I found that even driving from here to Mesa, Arizona, or Vegas, these are 6 hour drives roughly. You kind of have to stop and refuel yourself or relieve yourself.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
just selecting a place to do that and charging the vehicle at the same time means that a vehicle, even with a 300-mile range, isn't hampering a road trip as much as you might have thought a few years ago.
Right.
Especially like if you had an 80-mile range Nissan Leaf or the electric Golf, for example, that was really challenging.
Hmm.
But if you've got a 300-mile range vehicle or 400-mile range vehicle, and you can use a lower cost battery, which has lower supply side challenges, something like iron phosphate. I think there's a good argument to be made for that.
Yeah, I mean, I always think like they just want this big range for this like one time a year that I'm gonna do this crazy thing and I want it, but the other like 99% of the time you just haul around this expensive, heavy
Yeah.
battery pack that you're not really utilizing. So it is something that, it makes sense. So I think people will be happy to hear that you're thinking about that. How how difficult do you think it would be if Aptera decided to, you know, make a lithium iron phosphate battery pack? Like the cells are different shapes and everything, so you'd have to re-engineer an entirely different module and battery pack. Am I correct in
Well,
that?
you could go either way. You could just swap out the cells to be a different chemistry.
So they make
Um,
lithium iron phosphate in that same form
yeah,
factor?
yes,
Oh,
yeah.
okay. But the voltages
But
are different,
that's
right?
They are, yeah.
Uh-huh.
So the NMC goes from about 4 volts to 3 volts.
Hmm.
You wouldn't want to go much beyond 4.2 volts to maybe 2.6 volts.
Uh-huh.
So that's a pretty broad range compared to the 3.6 or 3.7 volt top for LFP, or iron
Uh-huh.
phosphate. So the top voltage of the battery is diminished. So that has perhaps some impact on performance of the electrical components, like the drive system may have less power available to it.
Hmm.
But ordinarily, the inverters, they can accommodate a much broader range, and
Hmm.
the LFP um, would operate sort of still in the fat part of the curve, right around where the NMC is operating. So the drive system in this case would operate normally. With the battery management system would have to have different settings put into it, but
Hmm.
all of the systems would probably be just fine, probably wouldn't even notice a difference.
So am I understanding you correctly in saying that if Aptera decided to switch to LFP, it would not be that difficult to make that switch?
Well, it wouldn't need to be that difficult, but just changing from a cylindrical NMC cell to a iron phosphate cell is probably not the best solution.
Mm,
The better solution would probably be to go with a prismatic cell.
mm. The
And the reason
pouches?
for that, yeah, well, there are a couple different types of prismatic. Some of the prismatic will have pouches inside of them, stuffed
Okay.
into a little rectangular box, and others will have the individual sheets of material laid up in a stack, and then that stack is put into a box. Or some of them they call like a jelly roll.
Mhm.
They create a roll and then they squish the roll down and stuff it inside of a rectangular box. But the reason that would be preferable is it affords you a better packing efficiency. You get a better kilowatt hour per volume basis doing it that way. And when you're buying larger cells, the cost per kilowatt hour also goes down.
Okay. All right.
So the packaging efficiency increases and the manufacturing costs decreased.
And then how long do you think that would take to make that transition to it's that's like a whole
I
new battery pack?
Yeah, I haven't studied it enough to give you a reasonable answer, but I think I can't imagine doing it in less than a year.
Okay. All right. Got it.
It would be a pretty big undertaking.
All right. Got it. All right. So some other common questions is can individual cells be replaced or serviced by the end user?
No,
Okay. That's can individual modules be removed and serviced and replaced by the end user?
I would say no, not by the end user.
Uh-huh.
Not because there's any physical barrier to doing that,
Uh,
but generally you wouldn't want to have an end user working on a 400 volt anything.
I see.
A service center like those that replace batteries in vehicles would probably be the best bet for that if there were a
Okay.
faulty module.
But a faulty module is designed to be replaced. You would have to replace the
Right.
entire pack because
Correct.
one module goes down. How does the, but individual cells are going to go bad. How does it, is there, can the battery handle a few cells going bad and still have the module function?
It can, though it would be at a diminished capacity. So these modules are constructed with the cells in a configuration where there are 24 cells welded together in parallel. And then that group is stuck into series with the next group of 24 cells. So if a single cell in a string, or sorry, not a string, if a single cell in a parallel group were to fail, you would have a diminished capacity of about 1/24th.
Yeah.
So it would be, what is that, maybe a 5% decrease in capacity. But the module would continue to perform normally if a cell had some internal fault that caused it to, let's say, maybe have an open circuit, for example.
Okay. All right.
And of course, it depends on the nature of the failure.
Yes. Yeah. Okay.
So sometimes they might fuse out if a cell had a internal short, then the wire bond that leads to it would open, and then it would just be isolated electrically, and it would no longer participate in the energy delivery.
Okay. And it's the battery pack modules are designed to do that.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's inherent in the design of a bus bar or current collector system.
Hmm.
The conductors are small enough so that if there's a fault, it should open the circuit rather than carrying enough current to do any kind of downstream damage.
I see. So the wire bonds or the bus bar will just like melt and like fall apart.
Just like a fuse element, yes.
Okay. All right. Okay, so more questions. Do we know the weight of one module and the weight of the entire battery pack?
I should have studied this before. No, I
Okay.
don't know off the top of my head. I think it's about 65 pounds per module
Okay.
times six.
Got it.
Um, so you do the math. And the frame probably um, 40 pounds, maybe 50 pounds.
Okay. All right. Do we know the use like what's the full kilowatt hour of the battery pack and what's the usable part of the battery pack?
Well, the full capacity, and this will depend to some extent on what cells we decide upon, because those little 2170 cells, they range from 4.8 amp hours up to about 5.2 or 5.3.
Hmm.
But it's generally around a 45 kilowatt hour battery pack.
Uh-huh.
Uh, 44 if you're precise with your calculation. So we'd probably only want to use 38 or 40 of those hours in order to stay away from the very high end of charge, which causes excessive calendar aging, or the very low end of charge, which causes the batteries to degrade rapidly.
Okay. Got it. Chris M came on Discord and he mentioned something about the number of cells in the module had to go down a small amount because some space had to be added. Can you talk to us about that?
Sure. Yeah, yeah, as I mentioned earlier, the frame contributes to some of the structural rigidity of the vehicle as a whole. So it participates in the crash protection in a sense. And one of the key things we need to be worried about is any intrusion into the battery pack touching and rupturing cells. So by removing a row of cells from the module, we were able to get the battery, the outside edge of the battery further away from the outside of the vehicle so that any deformation of the side of the battery and a side impact would not impinge upon the module or hit any of the cells.
Okay. All right. Um, so the current battery pack probably do you think it will be upgradable to like LFP or different chemistries or different cells, or is the battery module and the pack design pretty custom to the chemistry and the cells we're targeting now?
Uh, Chemistry is an interesting one because if you ask LG and Samsung and
Uh-huh.
Panasonic and EVE, ask any one of them what their chemistry is, the first thing they'll say is they're not going to tell you,
Uh-huh.
but they'll tell you that it's better than the other guys. So
Okay.
there's a lot of different chemistries within the NMC umbrella.
I see.
Um, and none of that makes any difference to us in
Okay.
terms of packaging. What makes a big difference is the form factor of the cells. So if we were to go with a lithium iron phosphate chemistry, for example, as I mentioned, we'd be better off changing the form factor of the cells to um, a either a pouch or a prismatic. And in that case, the existing battery design is not adaptable to that change. It would have to be redesigned internally, not
Okay.
not externally. We'd have to still fit it within the same frame of the vehicle, but the internal cross members and cooling plates and bus bars and all that sort of stuff would have to change to accommodate a different cell format.
Okay. Um, there's people have noticed that there's some kind of foam that something that looks like foam that's being injected into the modules. Like, what
Yeah.
is the purpose of that foam and what is that foam?
Well, it serves a few different purposes. It actually is a thermal barrier. It provides some level of insulation from heat. If one cell were to go into thermal runaway, the function of that foam would be to prevent too much heat from radiating out and causing the adjacent cells to follow and go into thermal runaway. So that's one function of it. Another function is it encapsulates the fragile things like the current collectors. So it just has to barely touch those current collectors and stick to them, and that prevents them from vibrating under normal operating conditions. So that prevents them from breaking off. It also acts to bring the all the individual cells in the battery together from a structural standpoint and sort of glue them together so the system is more like a rigid brick rather than a sort of a imagine like a stack of playing cards. You got a bunch of things in there that are individually pretty flexible
Hmm.
and you can bend the whole thing. But if you glued all those playing cards together, you wouldn't be able to bend it at all. And it does the very same thing for the battery module. It brings it together to make it structurally rigid, and it also helps to dampen any uh, vibration, which would cause noise.
Okay. All right. I think one or two more questions and we're done. These are the questions coming in from Discord. Um, is there going to be a DC to DC converter to eliminate the 12-volt battery? Or are we going to always have a 12-volt battery?
Never say always, but the answer is no.
Okay.
We will not be eliminating the 12-volt battery. So much stuff runs on 12 volts.
Uh-huh.
The lighting systems, the windshield wipers, the heater blower motor,
Uh-huh.
uh, all these things that are normal in automotive world um, are designed around a 12-volt battery, unless you look at something like the 48-volt system in a Cybertruck.
Mhm.
But in that case, everything had to be designed from the ground up to work with the 48-volt system. So we're pretty far away from taking that leap at this point, because it would mean that we'd have to design and build our own windshield wiper motor.
Yeah,
And that's not what we're about. We're focused on the broader high efficiency aspect of the vehicle, not the relatively unimpactful 12-volt system.
sure. So the 12-volt battery is charged by the traction, the motor, the large battery pack. Is that correct?
Yes, ultimately, all of the energy used in the vehicle comes from the big battery. But in the case of the 12-volt system, it does get recharged from
Mhm.
the through the DC-DC converter. Whereas in an internal combustion engine, you'd have an alternator. The DC-DC converter is similar in that it's providing power to charge the 12-volt system and keep it topped up.
Now, does that mean that the 12-volt battery can be relatively small
It
because
is
it could
very
concept?
small. Yeah, it's about this big and
Okay.
about that tall.
Okay. And what kind of battery is that? I'm guessing it's not a
It's
lead acid battery like in.
No, it's not. No, it's a NMC battery as well. And I think
Okay.
it's actually built with 18650 cells in it.
Okay.
I'm not positive, but it is a cylindrical battery on the inside, multiple cylindrical cells. And it has its own battery management system that protects it against overcurrent or overcharge, over discharge.
Awesome. All right. Is there anything that I should have asked you that I didn't?
Oh, I don't know. I didn't come prepared to answer that. I'm sorry.
Okay, no problem. All right.
You're the one who
Well,
provided the questions.
sure. Yeah, yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to talk to us, Tim. These are the questions that the community has, and we appreciate your expertise and your time to talk to us about it.
Well, you're certainly welcome, and thanks for putting in all the effort to put these things together so everybody can see the same thing you're seeing.
All
I'm
right.
sure they enjoy it.
All right. Thanks, Tim. Hopefully, when I visit down there, I'll get to meet you in person.
Oh, certainly.
All right. Have a good day.
Thank you. Have a good day. Bye.